Have you ever felt weighed down by the stresses and struggles of life? Like you're trapped on a never-ending cycle of ups and downs, from joy to suffering? Well, you're not alone. This is the human condition that many philosophies, including Buddhism, have sought to understand, and in Buddhism's case, that they have sought to transcend through the profound teachings of the Four Noble Truths. But where did this ancient wisdom come from? Our story begins over 2,500 years ago in ancient India with a young prince named Siddhartha Gautama. Born into a life of luxury and privilege, Siddhartha was shielded from the harsh realities of the world. That is, until one fateful day when he ventured outside the palace walls and came face to face with the sufferings of humankind, old age, sickness, and death. Deeply shaken by these encounters, Siddhartha embarked on a spiritual journey, leaving behind his life of comfort in pursuit of answers to life's biggest questions. After years of intense meditation and spiritual cultivation, he finally achieved enlightenment at the age of 35 and became known as the Buddha, which means the awakened one. It was under a fig tree in the town of Bodh Gaya that the Buddha attained enlightenment and discovered the Four Noble Truths, a profound set of teachings that lie at the heart of Buddhism and offer a path to freedom from suffering. So what exactly are these Four Noble Truths that have captivated and inspired millions worldwide? How can they help alleviate the pain and dissatisfaction we all experience at times in our lives? Let's explore. Life is suffering. This was the Buddha's radical insight into the first noble truth. Now, before we become too nihilistic, let's dive deeper into what this actually means. The Pali word dukkha is often translated as suffering, but it goes beyond just physical or mental anguish. Dukkha encompasses a profound sense of dissatisfaction and unease that permeates human existence. As the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh eloquently puts it, the suffering is there when we are run by our anxiety, fear, craving, and anger. Think about it. No matter how successful, wealthy, or accomplished we become, we're still plagued by the nagging feeling that something is missing. Our attachments and desires for money, fame, relationships keep us in a perpetual state of wanting more. As the ancient Buddhist scripture, the Dhammapada, states, we are what we think. All that we are arises from our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. And even when we do get what we want temporarily, it never quite lives up to our expectations. The fancy new car quickly loses its luster. The trendy gadget becomes outdated. The emotional high of a new relationship inevitably plateaus. As they say, happiness is impermanent, like a passing cloud. But suffering isn't just the failure to find lasting happiness. It's the inevitable pain of life itself. Being born, growing old, getting sick, losing loved ones, and ultimately facing death. As Steve Jobs said on his deathbed, no one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. The first noble truth is a wake-up call, a sobering realization that suffering is hardwired into the human experience. But rather than being a depressing realization, it's the ritual burning away of illusions, so we can clearly see reality as it is. Only then can we uproot the causes of suffering and unshackle ourselves from the cycle of dissatisfaction. So the next time you find yourself chasing yet another desire or beating yourself up over failure or loss, remember the first noble truth. Embrace the wisdom that suffering is an inescapable part of life. For it's only after we truly understand dukkha that we can begin to free ourselves from it. If the first noble truth says suffering is hardwired into existence, you might be thinking, that's it, we're all just doomed to be miserable? Well, not quite. The second noble truth gives us a crucial piece of the puzzle. It reveals the origin, the cause, the very root of all this suffering. And it turns out we're kind of the architects of our own anguish. But how? Well, according to the Buddhist teachings, suffering arises from our endless cravings, attachments, and delusions. It's our desperate clinging and thirsting for things to be other than what they are that keeps us stuck in the hamster wheel of dissatisfaction. Think about it. When was the last time you were stressed out or felt terrible about something? Maybe you were obsessively desiring something, a relationship, job, or a possession, or you were anxiously attached to some outcome or person and it didn't go your way. The root was the same. You're craving and clinging to an ideal reality that wasn't aligning with the real one. As the Indian poet Tagore eloquently expressed, the deeper you read into the world, the louder is his language proclaimed. He is not bound to be consistent with your desires. He continues coming from his endlessness. Our desires are what bind us, not free us. And how often do we get caught up in negative mind states like anger, jealousy, pride, all stemming from some deluded perception of how things should be instead of how they actually are? As Eckhart Tolle said, suffering begins when we resist what is. The Buddha summed it up eloquently. It is this craving which leads to further becoming, together with delight and lust, seeking its delight now, here and now there, namely craving for sense pleasures, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. And there's more to this affliction, according to the second noble truth, our deep-seated ignorance about the true nature of reality, that everything is ultimately impermanent, interdependent, and without a permanent self or soul, also causes us to naively crave and cling to things that can never satisfy us. So there you have it. Our relentless cravings, attachments, and delusions are like seeds that give rise to the suffering we experience. A tough pill to swallow, but a radical truth nonetheless. The good news? Once we get real about the root causes, we can uproot and transcend them altogether based on the third noble truth. So the first noble truth confronted us with the sobering reality of suffering. The second shed light on its root causes, our own cravings, attachments, and delusions. At this point, you might be thinking, damn, these Buddhists are a depressing group. But that's not the case, because the third noble truth brings it all back with an essential truth that's equal parts liberating and empowering. Suffering can be overcome. Your endless dissatisfaction, transcendable. The anguish you experience, not a life sentence. As the Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield puts it bluntly, you can get free. Now let that sink in for a second. You have the capacity to be free from the chains of craving, aversion, anger, jealousy, and all the baggage of life that can make us miserable. So how do we reach this ultimate freedom? By eliminating the root causes that the second noble truth revealed, our insatiable desires, attachments, and distorted views. When we uproot the deluded cravings that cause us to suffer, we liberate ourselves from that suffering. It's like we're all swimming up a river of dissatisfaction. But instead of struggling against the current, we realize the shore of liberation is right there all along. As the Zen teacher Alan Watts said, the resistance to the unpleasant situation is the root of suffering. Essentially, we create our own prisons of suffering by blindly following and feeding our desires and attachments. The third noble truth reveals that we hold the keys to unlocking those prisons at any time. As the Buddhist scholar Walpola Rahula states, when fire goes out for lack of fuel, it simply goes out. When all cravings are extinguished, suffering ceases. This is the state called nirvana. Nirvana isn't some mythical transcendent realm. It's the blissful realization and embodiment of the end of craving. No small feat, but one available to any of us at any moment, if we're willing to let go into the flow of reality just as it is. We've covered a lot of deep territory with the first three noble truths: the reality of suffering, its root causes in our cravings and delusions, and the liberating truth that freedom is possible by eliminating those causes. But you're probably wondering, that's great and all, but how exactly do I achieve this transformation? What are the practical steps? The fourth noble truth lays out a comprehensive path to put these teachings into practice and uproot suffering. It's called the Eightfold Path, and no, It's not some rigid set of rules or strict doctrine. Think of it more like an integrated philosophy for living a life of wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental mastery. As the Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh poetically explains, the Eightfold Path is something to be developed. Like a tree, we must allow it to grow. So what are these 8 prongs on the path? In a nutshell, they are right view, seeing reality objectively and developing a deeper understanding of the Four Noble Truths themselves. Ditch those distorted delusions. Right intention, cultivating positive motivations and commitment instead of being driven by negative impulses like greed, hatred, and delusion. Right speech, speaking truthfully, avoiding harsh or divisive language, and using words mindfully. Right action, following an ethical path by not harming others, stealing, or engaging in harmful misconduct. Be a moral maverick. Right livelihood, earning a living through ethical means that don't bring harm to yourself or others. Ditch the shady shortcuts. Right effort, cultivating practices that reduce toxic mental states while developing thoughts and habits that lead to well-being. Right mindfulness, training yourself to be fully present and aware, seeing things as they truly are in each moment. Right concentration, developing the unshakable focus and composure that comes through meditation, so you're not a slave to your wandering mind. As you can see, the Eightfold Path covers ethical conduct, mental mastery, and cultivating wisdom, an all-encompassing approach to uproot suffering at its core. As the Buddha taught, this is the way, there is no other that leads beings to purification. Now, the path isn't always easy. It takes diligent practice and effort, but stick with it, and you'll experience ever-deepening freedom, peace, and joy. As the Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield says, if you learn to live this way, you start to free yourself in the present. Little by little, you free yourself. So if you're ready to be liberated from the chains of craving and suffering, roll up your sleeves. It takes ongoing and sustained effort, but the benefits are obvious. We've covered a solid introduction to the central tenets of Buddhism, from the sobering reality of suffering to the root causes in our cravings, the possibility of transcendence, and the practical Eightfold Path to get there. So let's quickly recap the Four Noble Truths at the heart of these teachings. Truth number 1, life is filled with suffering and dissatisfaction, from aging, death, loss, not getting what we want, you name it. It's part of the human condition. Truth number 2, this suffering arises from our unquenchable cravings, attachments, and distorted views about reality. We're trapped in a cycle of chasing desires that can never truly fulfill us. Truth number 3, the good news. Suffering can be overcome and transcended by eliminating and uprooting those misguided cravings and attachments. Truth number 4, the Eightfold Path shows a practical way to uproot suffering through cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental mastery like mindfulness. As the Buddhist teacher Joseph Goldstein states, if we can meet this moment as the Buddha and follow these teachings, then we'll be free. We'll no longer be bound by suffering. Now you may be thinking, this all sounds great in theory, but can I really implement it in my modern life? The answer is absolutely yes, because at their core, these aren't just ancient Buddhist concepts. They're radically transformative perspectives on how to find freedom and lasting well-being in the midst of life's inevitable struggles. Just look at how the Eightfold Path translates to everyday wisdom, seeing reality objectively, acting with integrity, focusing your energy in a positive direction, training your runaway mind, universally powerful principles. As the Indian poet Tagore eloquently expressed over a century ago, the Buddha grasped the constitutive principle of human suffering in a way which is scientifically true for all time. He denied nothing but only sought freedom for the mind. So, if you're ready to break free from the chains of craving and delusion, and if you want to stop blindly following the impulses that lead to dissatisfaction and anguish, if you're ready for a life of profound peace, clarity, and well-being in the midst of life's storms, then perhaps now is the time to wholeheartedly incorporate the Four Noble Truths and begin walking the Eightfold Path. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single, courageous step. Let this be that first step into the freedom, happiness, and awakening that the Buddha realized and showed as a possibility for all. For an interesting exploration of another profound philosophy, one that lays out the principles that govern our universe and our place within it, click on this video. In it, we explain the principles of Hermeticism, which can also help enable us to live a more mindful life. Please don't forget to like the video, and we'll see you next time.